Classic anime is quite the staple for a lot of anime watchers. In the early 2000s, there were plenty of different animes entering the mainstream in very, very different ways. On one hand, you had Full Metal Alchemist in 2003, which was a dark story with deep characters and an incredible dub with amazing voice actors. On the other hand, you had Ouran High School Host Club. It was a romantic comedy, and it was probably the most mainstream romantic comedy to involve a reverse harem at the time. Both of these animes were incredibly well-loved in their circle and are still incredibly popular. Full Metal Alchemist got a reboot later in the 2010s with a story that went closer to the manga, and Ouran fans are, in fact, still begging for a season 2. Fans of both shows, and specifically the dubs, will know that Edward Elric and Tamaki Sho share a voice actor.
We welcome you, poor man, to our world of beauty! But despite what you think, that doesn't make what you're doing right, and
This is a little fun fact, considering they come from the same agency. Funimation runs both the dub for Ouran and Full Metal Alchemist. Now, these two characters share very little in common. They're both blonde male leads, though, and they both have a few similar personality traits like being arrogant or stubborn, maybe a little bit irritable, and both having the same yelling voice.
You expect me to believe that nothing was going on? You were alone in his bedroom, and why were the lights out? What do you call it, puny?
It's a funny little coincidence, which is what I thought when I first watched both shows. But how many coincidences can there be before things become too coincidental? What if I told you that nearly every single character in Ouran shares a voice actor with a character from Full Metal Alchemist? Now, of course, this can be chalked up to the fact that Funimation owns both the Full Metal Alchemist and the Ouran High School Host Club dub. Simple as that. But just for fun, let's take a closer look at the voices involved on this project. We obviously have Ed and Tamaki sharing a voice actor. We already knew that, but before we go any further, let's look at the female protagonists. If you're quick, you might recognize Ouran High School Host Club's voice actor Haruhi Fujioka as Winry Rockbell.
No, I know I'm right. Thanks a lot, Mr. Kimbley. These two are lucky to have you.
So now, the female lead share voice. But that's not all. Hikaru shares a voice with Ling from Brotherhood, and Kaoru shares a voice with Bido from the 2003 and Brotherhood Full Metal Alchemist.
You've got to be kidding me! How do you think I feel right now? You're mine now! Homunculus!
There's nothing you can do. You can't share my pain.
You! How dare you imitate Mr. Greed!
Mori shares a voice actor with Roy Mustang from both the 2003 and Brotherhood.
You should have realized by now that whenever you hurt others, you're really just hurting yourself.
I know, Lieutenant. Now go.
Kyoya shares a voice actor with Scar from Brotherhood.
Welcome to the Ouran Host Club, Mr. Honor Student.
So, that's the science you would spend your lives following?
And Honey-senpai shares a voice actor with Truth.
Hey, Haru-chan, do you want to go have some cake with me?
This despair is reserved for the boastful.
Yeah, the entire main cast of Ouran shares a voice with a Full Metal Alchemist character, which is a fun coincidence. But there's a few coincidences that I was not willing to shake off. And no, it wasn't in the main cast. Meet Dr. Yabu. He is by all means a good doctor, but he's in a financial bind. And his financial problems caused his wife to leave him, and she took their daughter with her. I don't know if that sounds familiar, but if you're a Full Metal Alchemist fan, it should. And the voice should sound even more familiar.
No, it's not what you think. Please just keep quiet.
If you want to check out the house that Dr. Yabu lives in, you can see a doghouse on the side with a dog in it. Yes, Dr. Yabu shares the same fake story as Sho Tucker, and he also shares a voice actor with him. It should also be mentioned that upon meeting the character, Tamaki immediately kicks him in the face, and Tucker is immediately questioned about his story and if his motives are true, or if he's making them up. It's thrown in his face that his relationship with his family isn't lacking because of his finances, it's his own strained relationship that he made.
Man, that's pretty sad. You don't even know what school your daughter goes to?
I bet your relationship is messed up because you don't pay attention to her, not because of some stupid debt.
His story is left on a completely open note that feels a bit somber for Ouran High School Host Club. As his character walks out of school, Tamaki, or Edward's character, just watches him go, and while he wishes to help, makes it clear that he might never get his daughter back, and that it's up to him to do the legwork.
Well then, that's something he'll have to find out for himself.
To, stand on his own two legs and walk, if you will. Speaking of his daughter, you might recognize Nina's voice actor playing a young boy in the series who keeps telling Tamaki that he's running out of time.
I don't have that much time! I'm gonna run out of time.
It comes to a point where this boy is literally put into a cage and begging Tamaki to let him out because he doesn't have too much time. Of course, this young boy doesn't get turned into a chimera. Instead, Tamaki has 3 days to help the boy. He takes time to recognize the problem in play and fix it, but one of the most damning piece of evidence is Yuzuru Sho, Tamaki's father. Not only does Ed's love interest share the same voice actor as his Oron counterpart, but so does his father.
Do not refer to me as father. The term is far too familiar. I haven't ever been able to do much for the boys, but I can at least do this.
Yes, Tamaki's father shares a voice actor with Hohenheim, Edward's father. You might think I'm about to tell you that these two have everything in common, but you're wrong, because Tamaki's father is much closer to Ed's perception of Hohenheim, personality-wise at least. Tamaki's father refuses to be called father or dad by Tamaki. In contrast, Ed refuses to call Hohenheim father or dad. Yuzuru is cold with his son, hardly treating him like a son at all, which differentiates from how the manga portrays him. Apparently, I'm not reading all the manga, sorry. However, backstory-wise, the two have a lot in common. Tamaki's father debatably abandoned Tamaki's mother. Yuzuru's one act of rebellion seemed to be being in a loving relationship with Tamaki's mother despite status, which is pretty similar to how Hohenheim's one act of rebellion was falling in love with Trisha even though he knew he would outlive her. In other words, what I'm saying is Edward and Tamaki are both giant mama's boys with daddy issues. There's plenty of other characters too with very specific similarities to each other. The host-hopping playgirl Kanako shares a voice actor with Lust. The harsh feminist, uninterested in men leader of the other school shares a voice actor with Maria Armstrong. Hell, the fangirling Renge, who has an obsession with a Prince Charming character she's never met before, shares a voice actor with May.
Renge!
I'm coming for you, my Prince Charming!
And obviously, Al is in there too, but we'll talk about him later. But what does that mean? I mean, they do line up, but not perfectly, and if anything, they're much closer to Edward's perception of these characters. Which means this isn't some alternate universe, it's something much different. That is to say, that Oron High School Host Club is actually an escapist fantasy that Edward has about the world while he is losing blood and bleeding out on the ground. Okay, hear me out. Hold on, I have a lot of evidence for this. During a battle with Kimley, Ed is impaled and losing blood fast. In that moment, he almost dies. He collapses to the ground and stops moving. The only thing that brings him out of it is the thought of Winry.
I won't make her cry. Especially not over something this stupid.
We aren't shown what Ed's thought process is here. What we know is that Ed was so preoccupied with Kimley, he didn't realize he was stabbed. After he realizes, he collapses to the ground. At no point does he say anything about Winry until he regains his consciousness. So what happened in that moment where he loses consciousness? I believe that this is where Oron High School Host Club takes place.
Hey, look, he's waking up. You think everything is absolutely perfect just the way it is now. And having this family setting will keep it all from changing, right?
I mean, after all, you love her, don't you?
You're going to have to live with the choices you make for the rest of your life. I advise you to think very carefully about what it is you really want before it's too late.
Just a dream.
Full Metal Alchemist.
For the rest of this video, I will be referring to Oron characters as their Fullmetal Alchemist counterparts. Edward plays a naive young man with his mother's eyes, who grew up in a sheltered home, the exact opposite of what he has in Amestria. He's also tall. The idea that Ed is playing a tall, handsome, and charming man to the extent of being so popular with ladies is incredibly ironic considering this boy recites the periodic table when he's nervous around a girl.
Lithium, beryllium, carbon, nitrogen, aluminum, silicon, phosphorus, chromium, manganese, iron, cobalt.
But sure, Ed gets to pretend he's good with women.
How does this look, Renge? Do you think these poses work for a lonely prince?
Oh, well, you're pretty good at that, Tamaki. But you know it would be even more effective if you were standing in the rain.
Meanwhile, Winry plays an incredibly smart honor student who got in by scholarship. Also, her parents are dead, or her mom is dead anyways.
How are things in heaven, Mom? I can't believe it's been 10 years already.
As opposed to the rest of the Auron students, Haruhi wasn't born into wealth, similar to how Winry lives in a small town with her grandma. And while they're very well off, it's pretty clear that the high-up state alchemists are rich. Yes, I am comparing the host club to the Amestrian military.
That means starting today, you're the host club's dog.
You will act as the Auron Host Club's dog until you graduate. I'm sorry, I meant our errand boy. You can try to run away if you want to, Haruhi, but just so you know, my family employs a private police force of 100 officers. By the way, do you have a passport?
As for the rest of the cast, it seems like Ed is making them all into characters and giving them happy endings. Remember how I mentioned Lust earlier? She's a host hopper, unhappily going from host to host. Except in this reality, all Ed needs to do to fix this problem is to, happily set her up with a dude. And that man is Kimberly.
Another girl already has my heart. I can find something that you do selfishly crave.
Look, Ed is losing a lot of blood. Considering that true love is really the one thing that killed Lust, this is one way to fulfill that without anyone dying. And Kimberly? Well, I wouldn't consider him the most eligible bachelor, but on the other hand, you're getting a 2-for-1. Kimberly and Lust are happily married and off together, not killing people. What a crack ship. We also see Ed fall pretty much immediately in love with Winry and into deep, deep denial.
Now, I could be wrong, but I think we may be witnessing the beginnings of love here.
Enter my theory that this is Ed's way of processing his feelings for Winry.
I bet you'll fall for me soon.
I swear, this guy must live his life completely unaware of the hardships of this world.
Ed doesn't have a lot of time for romance, considering the world is ending, but it's pretty apparent that he does have feelings for Winry throughout the show. But sadly, the kid has never had enough time to work through any of that, though I think if you look and notice, he seems to have gone through a bit of an arc by the end of the show about his feelings for Winry. His feelings seem more evident, and he's a bit more forward, and possibly honest with himself. He ends the show with basically proposing to Winry. So what arc did he go through? I think that Auron High School Host Club answers that question. Now, Ed's want to protect and be there for Winry is especially clear in Auron High School Host Club. And oddly enough, it's played completely straight, not for laughs.
Don't you worry. I'll protect you.
It always feels like, for just a second, his identity as Ed comes through, and you can hear it in the voice acting. Take the first scene where Haruhi cries. This is the episode where Mei is introduced. When actual violence is provoked, and the humorous tone is completely lost, which hasn't really happened as much in this show yet. I think it's pretty clear that violence in Auron High School Host Club is pretty rare, and you can immediately see Ed's serious reaction to it when violence occurs. The humor of this situation is completely lost, and that's because of Ed's reaction to it. If you'll notice, his voice immediately shifts to a more Ed-sounding voice.
What happened, Haruhi? one of you jerks started this.
And Ed's immediate reaction to seeing violence is to respond back with violence, much like how he's trained and what he would know how to do in the military. Eventually, the comedic tone is brought back after it's revealed that Winry wasn't really crying, her contact lens just fell out. And I think that's one of the most important things, and one of the biggest things in both Ouran and Full Metal Alchemist, is that Edward doesn't want to make Winry cry. Also, speaking of voice acting, I'd like to mention the fact that whenever Tamaki is having a little fantasy about how cute Haruhi is, Haruhi's voice acting completely shifts in pitch and tone to mimic Winry.
Here, darling, your boxed lunch. I hope you're not too embarrassed, but I decided to make it in a heart shape for you. I love you.
I don't care if my boxed lunch is in an embarrassing heart shape. I will eat it.
I have no idea what you're talking about, but it's evident that your fantasies are completely incoherent.
I can't make this shit up. The next episode focuses on the twins, also known as Ling and Beto. Isn't it interesting? In a sense, Ling has to share a body with someone. It's not Greed, though. Well, actually, the voice actor who plays Greed, specifically the one who shares a body with Ling in Brotherhood, auditioned for Ouran High School Host Club, not this role particularly, but he could have gotten a part if his schedule wasn't so busy. He ended up declining. Now, I would like to state that Greed has two different voice actors, and I'm not talking about O3 versus Brotherhood. I'm talking about the Greed that gets killed by Father and the Greed that ends up being a part of Ling. Those are two very different voice actors. So, maybe it's a smart decision to have Beto represent Greed, considering that Beto interacts with both versions of Greed. Beto is the one who ends up reminding Greedling about who he once was. But let's talk about the actual twins, and just how uncomfortable their dynamic is. What if I told you that this dynamic actually makes a lot of sense if you look at it from Ed processing the relationship between Greed and Ling, while losing a lot of blood? Because, really, what is the relationship between Greed and Ling? They share the same body, but they're kind of rivals, but they have the same motivation and some kind of bond. So is it brotherly? Homoerotic? Both? Furthermore, while the twins are played off as tricksters and, well, greedy, the connection is clearly there.
Every time I look in the mirror, I see his face. I'm sick and tired of constantly being mistaken for you, Kowdo.
At one point, they refer to Winry's character as a toy, which just lines up perfectly with Greed's character. And also, the idea that the twins are a romantic rival for Edward makes this line so much funnier.
Oh man, she's a peach. Sounds like she wants everything. My kind of girl.
The rest of the main cast is surprisingly more on the nose. For one, Honey Senpai is shown to be cute and sweet, but that's also shown to be somewhat of an act.
Just looks cuter this way, you know? I look cute.
He planned that?
Honey plays up his cuteness in order to seem more innocent. However, he is shown to be the most powerful and dangerous person in the group. As in, take down a squad of armored policemen with guns strong. In fact, he's referred to as a weapon of mass destruction. At his full potential, Honey is older, more dangerous, and knowledgeable than he seems. If you've forgotten, Honey shares a voice actor with Truth. On the other hand, Mori and Roy share a voice actor. Again, he's strong and has a lot of physical capabilities. Ed's only edit to Roy's character is making him talk less. Now, Kyoya seems like he might be the odd one out here. Other than being aggressive, he and Scar don't share a lot of qualities. Yes, Kyoya shares a voice actor with Scar from Brotherhood. The two don't seem to have a lot in common on the surface level. But let's talk about the beach episode. This episode is actually pretty intense for a beach episode. Sure, the first half plays out like usual, but then two girls are being harassed by some guys, and Winry stands up to them. She ends up getting pushed off a ledge into the water, and Ed has to save her. Ed argues that she shouldn't have been so reckless, and she shouldn't have picked a fight because she's a girl. Now, that's a pretty sexist argument, but I want to look at it through the lens of Full Metal Alchemist. Not that she's a girl, but that Winry is standing up to someone who's clearly more powerful and dangerous than she is. Sound familiar? I'm alluding to the scene where Winry confronts Scar. Now, Ed was nothing if not gentle and understanding towards Winry when this interaction happened, but the dread and panic he must have gone through when Winry almost made an enemy out of a serial killer was definitely existing. It's possible that he's using a much more domestic situation to vent his frustrations about the danger that Winry put herself through in that moment. Well, therapy aside, he stays upset, and that's when Haruhi runs into Kyoya back in his room. Sorry, let me rephrase that. That's when Winry runs into Scar in his room. In this moment, Scar takes the opportunity to put Winry in a compromised position. Fake out sexual assault trigger warning? Because the show fakes us out, I'm so sorry. It's a weird show. Hopefully I can give you a timestamp to skip to. He pins her to the bed. Now nothing happens, but I would like to point out that up until this point, Kyoya has had no romantic interaction with Haruhi, despite this being a reverse harem. And if you think this scene is somehow romantic, then your view of romance is a bit skewed. No, this is obviously a threat. Of course, Winry pulls the boldest move I've ever seen and responds with, "You won't." Her actual response is that he wouldn't do anything to her because he wouldn't gain anything from it. And this could be two things. For one, equivalent exchange. The idea of, I'm getting something from this. Taking Winry's life would do nothing for Scar. Scar has no reason to kill Winry. She's not a state alchemist, she's not an alchemist at all. And he's the one who's done her wrong. Scar makes it pretty clear that he doesn't want to take Winry's life. And if she thinks it's fair, she can shoot. Scar wants Winry to take the shot because it would only be fair. But in this position, neither of them have wronged each other to start with. When Winry encounters Scar, the words we hear playing in Scar's head is that the cycle of revenge needs to stop. And in his mind, right now, that could end in two ways. Either he gets revenge on every state alchemist for what they did to his country, or Winry takes revenge on him right now. But Winry's words, "you wouldn't gain anything from it," seem to be referring to where they are now. The cycle of violence hasn't started. Scar hasn't killed her parents. The war hasn't happened. What does he have to gain from the cycle of revenge? Especially now that the cycle of revenge isn't real. The conversation ends with Winry calling Scar a nice guy, which is crazy to say about a man who just threatened you, but somehow makes more sense if you think about Ed referring to Scar and the complexities of him, thinking he's a good person deep down. It never thought a serial killer would be a more redeemable character than a dude who has a weird way of showing his friend to be more careful. And this is where Ed walks into the room and sees the two on a bed and Winry pinned down and goes full, "I'm going to kill a man" again. And again, we see Ed slipping into his normal way of violence and his voice that sounds a lot more like Ed before the situation extinguishes and the comedy comes back. Hell, even after freaking out quite a bit, Ed admits that Winry has been through a lot today. That's one way to describe her encountering the man who killed her parents. And then it's revealed that Winry is scared of thunder. After Winry hides herself in the wardrobe, Ed comes to the realization Winry has been alone all her life. There's also a line that I like to think reveals something about Ed's character and his relationship with Winry.
You never call us for help even though we're so close.
This is the exact mentality that Winry has towards Ed. Winry gets upset because Ed and Al never talk to her about their problems because they don't want to burden her. But all the same, Winry needs Ed and Al in her life. But she carries on just fine without them. Even after she's faced her parents' murder and after she tries to cling to Ed's hand as he's walking away, she doesn't ask for help. She manages to smile after everything and just support Ed and Al. Winry always calls to help Ed and Al, but she never calls to help herself. Ed ends up promising Winry that he'll always be there for her. And in a world where Ed has no responsibilities to the military or getting his brother's body back, he can freely make that promise. And maybe that is the true escapist fantasy that Ed could have. A world where he can be there for Winry.
Full Metal Alchemist.
Moving on, it's time to introduce Fort Briggs, or as Oron fans might know it, the rival lesbian school. Meet Olivia Armstrong, but instead of being a major general for Fort Briggs, she's head of a theater club at an all-girls school. Now, Olivia Mira Armstrong is a very feminist character who carries strength and cutthroat mentality so she can thrive on Fort Briggs. She has no seen interest in men, and on the contrary, she's used her gender in order to prey on men who believe in stereotypes like women being weaker in order to catch them off guard by her brutal tactics. The mentality of survival of the fittest doesn't necessarily fit into a romantic comedy, so in Ed State, which is losing a lot of blood really fast, we have Benio, who is a very aggressive lesbian. It's very silly, but the idea that this school is after Winry could allude to the fact that Winry was brought down to Fort Briggs and used as a hostage. Now, brief intermission to talk about something that didn't exactly age well in Oron. A lot of the characters, including Tamaki, who I'm claiming is Ed, said some shitty homophobic stuff. Now this raises the question, is Ed homophobic? I'm here to debunk that. And let me tell you, the answer is no. And yes, I'm inherently biased because I like his character, but I have good evidence. The original homophobic comments that Tamaki makes is using Christian ideals, and not just in the dub, also in the Japanese version.
You girls have it all wrong! Don't you see there's nothing to be gained in a romantic relationship between two women? If that were the case, then why did God create Adam and Eve?
And Christianity is not canon in the Fullmetal Alchemist manga, nor Brotherhood. However, it is canon in the 2003 anime. I'm not joking. They say the words, before Christ, in Amestria, not even in the Nazi world. But my theory revolves around Brotherhood and the manga. So I would consider this knowledge that Ed doesn't have. Also considering the fact that we've never seen homophobia in Amestria, so I wouldn't consider it common. The same can be said about the transphobic comments. It's possible that because of the Christian canon in the 2003 Fullmetal Alchemist, a writer made a mistake and assumed that Christianity was canon in the manga, but they would be wrong. This is the only thing I will consider wrong, whether that be about my theory or the writing in this connected universe, because I'd rather have a flaw in my theory than have a beloved character from a fairly progressive piece of media be considered homophobic. He sees no difference. Love is love. Moving on from that, you might recognize the voice of an old lady who butts heads and criticizes Edward as the voice of Granny Pinocchio. So we can see that, even in this universe, while Ed doesn't consider her direct family, she's there to take care of him, to look after him, and maybe bully him a bit.
You must be able to recognize your own mistakes. Since you suddenly have some free time on your hands, why don't we work on your manners?
Granny, you've got it wrong. You're supposed to say how big you've grown lately, Ed.
But why would I say something so clearly untrue?
And I don't think it's a coincidence that this is the episode that focuses on Winry's family. For one, in this world it's only Winry's mom that died. The only flashback that we get of Haruhi's mom is her leaving and saying that they're gonna win this one and she'll do her best. Coincidental? Both of these representations of Pinocchio and Winry's mom make a lot of sense. But Haruhi's father is the odd one out. He's voiced by the same voice as the actor playing Jean Havoc, or Jean Havoc, because that's how the author wanted it pronounced, but I'm ignoring that, it's Jean. I wouldn't exactly consider Havoc as a fatherly type, but you could consider his fascination with women portrayed in a very different way with him working as a drag queen. It's also a bit interesting that Havoc's character in Oron swears off loving women after his wife dies, making it so that Havoc's womanizing behavior is completely lost. But really, the casting seems to be more comedic than anything. Ed probably doesn't have much memory of the Rockbells, so it would make sense that he would give the role off to someone else. You're probably asking, why not someone a bit more fit for the role, like Hughes? Which I will say, we'll get to that later. But since we're on family, let's bring up the weird family projection that Tamaki brings onto the club, including the concept of the father-daughter bond that he inflicts on him and Haruhi. It's weird. It's weird. People in the Oron universe qualify that as weird, okay? This isn't something about my theory that makes this thing weird, it's always been weird. I'd like to preface this by saying Ed is losing a lot of blood. Also, he's a teenage boy working through romantic feelings, probably for the first time in his life. Which, I'd like to bring you to Exhibit A. How Edward talks about his relationship with Winry. When Riza questions or pretty much states that Ed loves Winry, Ed immediately panics and says that Winry is like family.
Like that? We've just been friends since we were little kids. She's like family to me. I mean, of course, I'm gonna protect her, you know?
Now, it's pretty clear that Ed doesn't see Winry in this kind of way, but for a teenage boy in denial, saying, she's like family, she's like a sister or a daughter to me, is something you might say. Especially when you're losing a lot of blood.
He must be one of those jealous pervert types. That's pretty twisted.
That's not it at all. I was just trying to protect her innocence as any father or guardian would.
This is Ed working through his feelings and working through every excuse that he's made for why they can't be together and why he's suppressing his feelings. Speaking of working through things, let's talk about our next coincidental voice actor, Kirimi, being played by Alicia Hughes. She immediately adopts Ed as her big brother, which young girls tend to do with Ed.
That person, Edward. Big brother Ed.
Ed says he's an only child, at least as far as he knows. Ed is also quick to retract that statement the second the girl gets a little sad and says, "But you're blonde like me." On the other hand, we have an unlikely duo with the teenage brother of this young girl being played by Sloth's voice actor from Brotherhood. Both characters are shunned away in the dark, except Sloth is put in tunnels underground to burrow. This kid just has a condition where he can't interact with sunlight. This is very much an oddball duo, but I think they're really just used to explore the idea of a sibling relationship here.
Sibling relations are a source of problems in any family.
Obviously, Ed is quick to accept the idea of a younger sibling in his life, but it's this line from Winry that really sets the tone.
I grew up an only child, so I can't really relate. But I can't imagine how tough it must be to have a sibling that's so different from you that you can't even spend time together.
We could even talk about the parallels that this sibling duo has to do with Ed and Al, with one sibling being completely unable to recognize the other because of the physical change that he's been through. It's at this moment that Ed admits he's not Nina's brother, but she has a real brother out there, and I dare say, so does he. Ready for things to get real on the nose? Great. Here's Oron's dream episode, or as I like to call it, the Inception episode. In this episode, Haruhi has a dream that resembles Alice in Wonderland in both structure and references. This is where we get to see a lot of depth into Winry's character. For example, she falls into a pool of all the tears she's cried throughout her life. It's a massive amount. To which Scar says,
"Looks as though you've been through more than your fair share of hardships."
Which feels pointed, coming from the man who killed her parents. This may also be important because Ed feels guilty for how much Winry has cried for them.
What are you crying for, Winry?
You two won't cry. Someone else should do it for you, don't you think?
The next time I make you cry, I hope there'll be tears of joy!
We also get to see Sloth turn into a baby, which could be what gave Edward the idea to turn Pride back into a fetus. Or maybe not. Just a suggestion. But that does lead to the line,
"Being with your mother is always the best thing."
little bit on the nose there, Edward Mommy Issues Elric. Edward is also the first to point out that her hair is long and that it's a good look for her. Which leads me to a point I've noticed for a while now. Haruhi's long hair looks a lot like Winry's long hair, with 2 strands in the front. I just think it's interesting that Ed takes such a liking to Haruhi with long hair, possibly because it makes her look more like Winry. This episode is a bit of a mix between both Edward and Winry's emotions on the same topic. For one, I know I talked about Winry's mom passing away, but I don't think I mentioned that she looks a bit like Ed's mom. It's also implied that Haruhi means to follow in her mother's footsteps career-wise, similarly to how Winry is willing to take on the family business. This is a big emotional climax for both characters, who lost their mothers at a young age. And it all ends with Winry saying,
I have to admit it though. Around here, I can hardly even tell when I'm awake.
Remember how I said Maze Hughes comes in later? He sure does. Maze Hughes shares a voice actor with the host of Haruhi's Summer Job. Here, Hughes plays a role of someone who's been put in charge to look after Winry by her father and to affectionately look after her. I think that fits Hughes' character better. Also, Ed's talent is shown to be piano here. It's interesting that in a world without alchemy, he would choose a talent that focuses on his hands. Anyway, this story arc is where we meet Barry the Chopper. Didn't see that one coming either. Barry is someone who had a crush on Winry back in middle school. This is a weird way to clock someone as a threat, but it sure is a romantic comedy. I'm sure Ed would prefer a world where his biggest threats in life were people who liked Winry, instead of serial killers.
This anime is obviously a romantic school comedy. Haruhi and I are the main characters, so that means we are love interests. Yeah, then what are we? You boys are the homosexual supporting cast.
But this episode is actually about making greed less selfish. It's a common theme in Oron, and I think I should mention it. It's also funny that to make a romantic date, Ed's first thought is to send Scar in to pick a fight. Probably because one of the most romantic moments he's had with Winry came from a battle with Scar.
This is the lamest excuse for a date I've ever seen! I should switch with Hikaru! I'll show her a good time! That would ruin everything! Get out there, Killya! Act like a punk and pick a fight with Haruhi so Hikaru will have to rescue her!
Where do you dream this stuff up?
Look, the man doesn't know how to date, but he sure likes to pretend he does in this world. Speaking of which, we should probably talk about the serial killer himself. And by that I mean Scar. Scar and Killya, like I said before, don't exactly have a lot in common. Though the line, "Tamaki's a dead man when I find him," is pretty damning. The two are both irritable, and they do have the same sense of action and consequence. With Killya, he only does things because he can gain something from them. He sees an action and wants the best consequence from it. He doesn't do things unless they benefit him. Meanwhile, Scar takes the opposite route with this. Scar sees something bad that happens to people and thinks that someone needs to pay for it. These are two sides of the same coin. Both characters have very defining backstories. The difference between them is that they come from two very opposing backgrounds. Killya is the product of strict capitalism and business practices, while Scar is the victim of war and prejudice. This means that while Killya is conniving and calculated, Scar is vengeful and serious, unable to mask his anger, whereas Killya is able to mask his true self. This might be a result of the fact that Oron doesn't take place during a war, but even so, the contrast is stark. Now, Killya does get a backstory episode at the end of the season, and it really shows how similar he and Scar are and their backgrounds are, despite coming from completely different worlds. Killya is told that he is different from his older brothers, similar to how Scar is different from his older brother. When talking about his father, he's told,
He doesn't expect as much from you.
Did I mention that his brothers are doctors?
Your brother's alchemy might be the only way we have of saving Ishval.
However, something very different about this universe is Ed's want to fix everything while being a naive little sweetheart. Ed is shown in contrast to Killya. He's characterized as a naive foreigner, possibly to resemble Ed's lack of knowledge about the genocide of Scar's people when the series first started. Though he also ends up confronting Killya, saying that he assumed Killya wanted more, that he isn't happy in his situation. The conversation gets even more heated when Tamaki basically throws away his destiny as the heir to his father's company to be a scientist. Interesting career choice, Ed. Killya loses his temper and invokes violence, grabbing Tamaki and screaming that he's been blessed with fortunate circumstances, and eventually throws the question in his face.
Who the hell are you?
possibly questioning a man born in privilege how he could choose something so foolish when he's been blessed with a living in a privileged situation, much like how Ed chose the military life and alchemy despite his way of life not being threatened in the slightest, unlike Scar, whose brother chose to go into alchemy because it may have been the only way to save Ishval. It could also be the fact that these people have two completely different identities outside of this dream, and it's finally being called into question. And Tamaki responds back with saying that maybe Kyoya's the one who's given up. In a world where his people have all been killed, Scar is either hoping that every state alchemist dies at his hand, or that he dies at the hand of someone he's wronged, like Winry. Scar has given up, resigned to the position he's in and refusing to let the hatred, the wrath within him die so that he can begin living. Scar's life has been about choices and stepping out of the mold he's put himself in with his hatred. In a sense, he and Kyoya are alike. And maybe the fact that he's a serial killer is hinted at with the line,
Man, your face, it looks evil. So you're finally showing your true colors.
Either way, both characters are finally escaping the trap of hatred. Call it Kyoya's growth, Scar denouncing prejudice, or the acceptance of this escapist fantasy. But either way, Kyoya's ending statement for the episode completes his character.
But for some reason, I got the feeling that if I shared his world, I would experience something different than anything I'd ever experienced before.
It's also important to mention that Scar is probably the biggest thing on Edward's mind other than Kimley during this situation, considering that Scar is holding Winry hostage right now.
Scar, if you do anything to hurt her,
I won't harm the girl. I keep my promises.
The only way that Edward can keep sane right now is assuming that maybe Scar is a good person deep down, and he truly won't hurt Winry. Maybe the cycle of revenge ends with her.
Full Metal Alchemist.
I was all alone in a different dimension!
Scary! Did that really happen to you?
That only happened because you were so scared you accidentally walked into the beginning Greek class and took their exam.
No, it was a curse! I know because 3 days later I woke up and my legs were as heavy as lead! Just how do you explain that?
I guess those claws don't do so good against steel.
But honestly, this wouldn't be Full Metal Alchemist without a very obvious key character. So I will finally talk about the missing puzzle piece, Alphonse Elric. Or, as Ouran High School Host Club would have you believe, Chika Honeynozuka, Honey's younger brother. Honey's younger brother shares a voice actor with Alphonse Elric from the 2003 anime. Chika is interested in fighting, a certain break from the genre. Some might say he'd be more fit for a shonen. The episode where Al is introduced is when Honey is legally referred to as a weapon of mass destruction. That being said, Chika is very close to being able to take him down. Ed sees his brother as strong, almost strong enough to take down Truth. We also, once again, see an interesting relationship with siblings. For one, Chika is shown to resent his older brother, which is the same way that Ed was afraid Al would resent him for putting his soul in a suit of armor. Though this way, it's a bit more accurate, because Al holds a grudge against Truth, not Ed. Also, if you need more proof that Honey is Truth, Chika calls Honey an alien and describes several impossible things that he has done.
You know there's no way that a regular human being can eat that much cake. Aren't you terrified? I bet he gets signals from his home planet through that weird bunny of his. Why can't you see that he's an alien?
He shows absolutely no mercy to his brother and is seen to be a bit heartless, but truly strong.
Man, he's a horrible person.
Al isn't kept around for too long. I think it would break the illusion for Ed if he were to stay. And he also isn't shown to be Ed's brother. Instead, there's this degree of separation. But Al is also there to embody all of the fears about coming back into the real world that Ed has. That his brother resents him, or that Truth will defeat him. Al can't stay long in this fantasy, but it wouldn't be Ed's fantasy if Al wasn't at least in it.
Full Metal Alchemist.
Ed is finally forced to confront his feelings with a little help from our good friend Major Alex Lewis Armstrong, also known as Ritsu, the heir to the Yakuza throne. In Ed's little fever dream, Armstrong does gain a crush on Winry once he realizes she's a girl, which I cannot state enough. Ed is losing so much blood. The man is just taking the most manly man he can possibly think of and projecting the insecurity that other people might like Winry. And to his credit, this is his biggest step in him accepting his feeling. Edward is definitely projecting his affection towards Winry onto every single character in this show, because nearly every character thinks she's cute or is actively falling in love with her. This is also evident from the line,
"Oh, she's giving him the adorable smile, the one which no man can resist."
Ed spends the entire episode just reeling from the fact that someone might like Winry and make a move on her. And this is when he's confronted with the fact that his weird little delusion of a father-daughter relationship is probably created from a lack of blood.
When she's with another man, why is it that I become so insanely jealous? I'm not her father. I have no right to be so protective, no right whatsoever. Then how can it be that I find her so utterly adorable?
He finally comes to the conclusion that he finds Winry cute, and he's very protective of her, and if that doesn't define their relationship in Fullmetal Alchemist, I don't know what does. He's asked if he's finally woken up, which he hasn't. The blood loss gets worse and he slips back into his delusion, but he was so close to waking up and accepting his feelings, just for a moment. Of course, people who've watched Oron know that a few essential characters come into play in the late episodes. What you may or may not know is who they share voice actors with. Yes, Tamaki's father is voiced by the same man as Hohenheim, Edward's father. But did you know that Eclair Tonnerre, the woman who's always spying through opera glasses, is also voiced by Riza Hawkeye, my girl. The opera glasses could obviously be a reference to the name Hawkeye and the fact that she's a sniper, though it does feel a bit weird casting her in a role where she's engaged to Ed, but I want to think about this from a metaphorical sense. Let's consider the fact that no romantic interest is displayed from either party. While Ed might be losing a lot of blood and is under the impression that every man is after Winry, he doesn't have any romantic feelings for Hawkeye and knows that Hawkeye doesn't have any romantic feelings for him. That'd just be silly. He even asked her at the end if,
"Are you sure about this? Will you even be happy married to me, or are you just following orders?"
Almost like she's a dog of the military. That's the thing though, Eclair, or Riza, is a very good representation of the military in Amestria, specifically Ed's relationship with the military. Riza is the right hand of Colonel Mustang and was also there when Ed was indoctrinated into the military. It seems to me like Ed views the military as something that's taking him away from his family, but also as something that he's agreed to basically be arranged to marry. And there's two ways that joining the military could go. Either Ed and Elle get their bodies back, everything they've ever wanted, or they die trying, and in other words, see their mother again. Which is exactly the choice of words used to describe Ed's engagement to Eclair. Tamaki will be engaged to Eclair, and he'll get to see his mother again. Or in other words, Ed will join the State Alchemists and die on the field. Something that is currently happening to him as he's bleeding out on the ground. But that's all in Fullmetal Alchemist. Let's talk about Oron. More specifically, let's talk about Hohenheim. When Tamaki's father is introduced, he demands that Ed not call him father, and while this could be an example of how Ed refuses to call Hohenheim by any paternal name, it could also be a reference to the character, father, and how he is not the same. Which brings me to someone else. Kyoya's father comes into the scene and immediately slaps Kyoya across the face. An abrupt entrance for sure, and when he's done speaking, he goes to Tamaki's father. If you listen to these two talk, you might recognize their voices, and specifically while they're next to each other.
Suo, my friend, I am sorry you had to witness that.
That did seem rather harsh.
There's von Hohenheim.
Yes, it's Hohenheim's other half, father. To have father voice another father figure who's not related to Ed, that is strict, harsh, and physically violent, seems to be a good fit. And Father's actions have some impact on Ed as his own father confronts him, stating,
"Whims have consequences, Tamaki. Take my word for it, they do not come cheaply for people like us. Accept it. Life is hard. It's time for you to grow up and realize that dreaming only postpones the inevitable."
So there's a lot to unpack there. Taking this one step at a time, Hohenheim states that whims have consequences. Could be referring to many things. It could be the fact that he made a deal with the original homunculus, now father, and caused a civilization to die. It could also be referring to Ed's attempt to bring his mother back. In my eyes, it's both, considering how he states that whims don't come cheaply to people like us. Hohenheim is warning Ed that both of them have done things that have hurt other people, that have put people in dangerous situations, and they cannot continue to do that. The next thing is something that's been getting brought up more and more episode after episode of Oron, and that's dreams. Between the Wonderland episodes, Scar's line calling this his world, and now Hohenheim telling him that dreaming only postpones the inevitable, it seems like Ed is starting to wake up, or at least become aware he's dreaming. And Ed is just postponing the inevitable. This dream is a state of limbo. He's not living his life, but he's not dead either. The dream itself is basically asking him if he's going to wake up or die, meet his mother in France. France becomes a metaphor for death, just go along with it. Edward's father then tells him there's a hard road ahead of him. He needs to live with the choices that he makes. He has to live with the mistakes he's made, the things he's sacrificed, and the people who choose to be near him and who he chooses to leave behind. Hohenheim states that Ed needs to decide what is important to him before it's too late. We then hear Tamaki's backstory, and boy does it sound familiar. Tamaki's father had a relationship with a woman in poor health. Even though he loved her dearly, they couldn't be together. Tamaki lived with his mother and had a happy childhood for the time he was with her. However, the mother's illness became worse, and Tamaki left her behind in France. Death.
It's new to me. When I was growing up, I never really had any friends that were my age. My mother would get sick very easily. I was always worried about her, so I didn't go out and play much. Instead, I would do my best to cheer her up. I'd always sit beside her and play the piano. That's probably why now I love playing these silly games with all of you. It's a lot of fun.
Now, we don't actually see the scene that leads up to Tamaki's engagement to Eclair, but we can gain some things based on what happened. Based on context, Eclair says,
"So stop playing house."
And while that could be viewed in a romantic sense, I think here it can be viewed as Edward knows he's playing pretend. At this point, none of his friends are really here, and he knows it's a dream. I mean, the fact that it's a dream is pointed out to him at every occasion. He surely has to know at this point. So the idea of not playing house is to come back to the military, is to come back to the reality that he chose for himself. Stop pretending that everything's going to work out and he can have this life with his friends and family because it's not what he chose. The host club is told by Tamaki's maid, otherwise known as Pinako, that Tamaki is going away to France. And all of their reactions to going to France seems a lot deeper than he's going out of the country.
Evidently, Tamaki is planning to return to France.
Huh? Tama-chan is going to leave us?
You're kidding me! I can't just let it end so suddenly.
Pinako then states that if Edward's mother is really the amazing person that he thinks she is, then she wouldn't be happy with him leaving like this. There's even a shot of a shrine to Haruhi's mom with the line,
"There are many things in this world that you cannot ever change, no matter how desperately you try."
Thank you, Ed. Very on the nose. When Winry does chase after him, Ed's first concern is her safety and how it might be dangerous for her to be doing this. Once again, Pay attention to the voice acting in this scene, specifically Winry's voice acting, and how her voice sounds when she's calling out to Ed.
After all this time we've been together, you still can't tell when we're joking and when we're serious? Everyone loves being in the host club. We really do. Even me, Senpai. I love being part of the host club too.
She calls out to him and says that everyone's life is better with him in it. And once again, the second that Winry is put into danger, Ed's first response is to protect her. And, just like in the future, Ed goes for the embrace to pull her close to him because the man does not know how to kiss a girl. The idea that Winry is pulling him out of death here is not lost on me. Ed is bleeding out on the ground, dying, and while he might be determined to get his body back, the pain overtakes him and he falls to the ground. He loses consciousness. It is possible that the only thing that's pulling him out of death and out of accepting his fate is that there's still people in his life who love and need him. The final scene of Oron is a dance that plays out while Father and Hohenheim talk. Father states that he knew that Scar would surpass his older brother. In Oron's case, it's business, but in Fullmetal Alchemist's case, it's in life. Though talking about his destiny, Kyoya manages to save his father's business only to hand it back to him. He's found something with even greater value to it, and that's probably thanks to Tamaki. I think this line really talks about how Scar is finally ending the cycle of revenge. And so, of course, Ed wants to see Scar end the cycle of vengeance here and now, especially because Winry is in his hands. As fireworks go off and Ed and Winry dance, even Father and Hohenheim come to an agreement in Ed's perfect world. With that, Ed gets to close out with the same monologue he opened with describing his escapist world. Winry ends by saying to the audience, or simply, "You can come back anytime. They'll be waiting."
But when you care for someone, you must find the courage to express what is in your heart. You have to tell her how you feel about her.
Fullmetal Alchemist is seriously an incredible shonen, but it's never been exactly groundbreaking at romance. Explaining how Ed goes from being in denial about his feelings to basically proposing to the woman in his adulthood is a mystery. And I don't care how much of a shonen this is, almost seeing her boobs does not count as an arc.
I just wanted someplace private to eat my sandwich.
The whole end of the world thing probably would stop Ed from processing his feelings, but having a quick moment to lose some blood and go on a hallucinatory trip where he processes his feelings towards his childhood friend, he can indulge in that. There's just too many coincidences. The voice acting, the characters, the writing, there's no way they can all be unintentional. The only explanation that would possibly make any sense is that Ouran High School Host Club is Fullmetal Alchemist's shoujo arc. And another thing, the voice actors from Brotherhood years after 2003 and Ouran would be some prolific coincidence if it happened to cast Ling or Scar or any of these people by coincidence. It very well may have been a planted decision to later cast these actors down the line, making it foreshadowing of Brotherhood's production. It's the only explanation that makes sense, especially considering that Ouran High School Host Club by itself is already a fever dream. Have you ever watched Ouran High School Host Club? It is the weirdest show you will ever see. It only makes sense between the scene of Edward passing out and regaining consciousness. The only true way to watch Ouran High School Host Club is pausing in the middle of episode 41 of Fullmetal Alchemist and then watching through the entirety of Ouran and then going back to Fullmetal Alchemist. This is the truth. I have found it. I am a genius. If the truth in the 2003 anime can lead to Nazi Germany, why can't mine lead to a shoujo anime from 2006? I honestly have no idea why in 2003 they decided that the portal goes to Nazi Germany, but I feel like that's a whole nother video essay and a whole nother 20-page script. This script was 20 pages, but if you are a believer in the Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood and Ouran High School Host Club shared universe, thank you. I've done my job. I don't know, like and subscribe, but spread the truth. People need to know. I've been on about this theory for months, and so now I get to share it to the world. And, I think it's fun. Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood is one of my favorite animes of all time. This theory made me so much happier to watch Edward and Winry's relationship, just because that, like, it's not really that fleshed out in Fullmetal Alchemist, which makes sense. They have other things to cover. They're not too concerned about the romance between two teenagers. But if you give it this little arc, I think it's a really cute way to have their characters get some bonus content. I hope I didn't insult anyone with my inane ramblings of these two universes being connected. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope that I've converted some of you all to my inane theory here. Yeah. If you want me to cover any other topic that's incredibly niche and nerdy, let me know, because that's what I do.